feet.
3, 2, 1.
Okay, welcome to Comic Book Pros, presented by the Lake Como Comic Art Festival, an interview show where we talk to some of the most interesting and creative comic artists working today. I'm your host, Scott Dunbier, ready to take you on another ride through the colorful world of comic art.
Comic Book Pros is sponsored by the Lake Como Comic Art Festival, and I want to tell you about what makes this thing so special. Join us May 17th to 19th for 3 days celebrating comic art against the stunning backdrop of Lake Como, Italy. Are you ready for an unforgettable experience? Whether you're a seasoned comic collector or just dipping your toes into the world of comic art, the Lake Como Comic Art Festival has something for everyone. Who says you shouldn't meet your heroes? At Como, you'll have the chance to meet some of the biggest names in the industry. Legendary artists, writers, creators, and with only 1,000 attendees, you'll for sure have the opportunity to meet and interact with your favorites in real life. Don't miss out on this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to celebrate your love for comics in the picturesque setting of Lake Como. The Lake Como Comic Art Festival is happening May 17th to 19th, 2024, and tickets are limited, so reserve your slot today. You can find tickets and more at www.lccaf.com. That's www.lccaf.com. Don't miss out on this exclusive event.
Today we're talking to a bold and meticulous artist who has left an indelible mark on modern comic art, Lee Bermejo. With his distinctive style and attention to detail, Lee has brought some of our favorite heroes to life in original and imaginative ways. Known for his bold and boundary-pushing illustrations, Lee has carved out a distinctive niche in the industry with his striking character designs and atmospheric storytelling. From his unique portrayal of Gotham's Dark Knight to his haunting reinterpretations of classic heroes and villains, Lee's artwork has captivated readers and critics alike. The images really speak for themselves, just stunning, stunning stuff. And we're excited to have you on the show. Lee Bermejo, my old friend, thank you for joining us on the podcast. It's nice to see you, pal.
Likewise. Thanks for having me.
So, I have a bunch of different questions for you. First, how did you actually break into comics? Because the first time we met was at WonderCon.
Yeah, I think I was 17 when we met. I think I think I was 17. I'm pretty sure I had just graduated high school, because then I went and did. I went to UCSB for a year. I did a year of film school there. And yeah, I mean, I showed you my samples, and my memory I have a horrible memory, but my memory of it was I met you and Jonathan Peterson around the same time. Maybe actually, no, I met you first. And then I met JP when I think I was already in Santa Barbara, because I went to a signing. I think Matt Broom was doing a signing, and I almost got fired for that, actually, because I was working at a Haagen-Dazs place, and I had to go on my break. So I had a 15-minute break, and it wound up being like a 35, 40-minute break. And so I went to this signing and met JP. But yeah, the kind of, meeting both of you guys at the same time, I started to keep in touch with you specifically, because I was sending you packages of, photocopies, at that point. No email at that point in time. So it was just, photocopies. That's my memory.
And I remember at WonderCon, you showed me samples that specifically were of Superman fighting a giant gorilla creature. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
And I brought those samples back to WildStorm, and I said I showed them to Jim Lee, and I said, we got to bring this guy down as an intern. Do you remember? I think I told you what his reaction was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Jim looked at them. Jim looked at them and said, Yeah, I'll call him when I need a big monkey artist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Arthur Allen, or this kid from, this kid.
But I mean, in my mind, there was no doubt that you were ready at that point to come down, and so the following year, as I remember, I saw your stuff. I saw you at WonderCon again, and you had more stuff, and I brought it down to Jim again. And I said, Jesus Christ, let's bring this guy down here. And then he looked at it and went, yeah, you're right. And so then you came down and you became an intern at WildStorm. So
Yeah.
can you tell us, what was it like? I mean, at that point in time, WildStorm had, I think, some of the absolute best artists in comics. I mean, the lineup was ridiculous.
Yeah.
What was it like? What was it like working there, coming to the
Um,
studio?
I was so singular about working at WildStorm that I, and it was just because of what you said. I thought the best new guys were working at WildStorm. You know, you had Aaron Weisenfeld and people who were doing work that to me, it was like, you know, I could relate to those younger guys more than I could relate to Mike Mignola or Arthur Adams or Jim or any of those guys. That was already too far beyond anything I could hope for at that point in time. But I was seeing these younger guys at Wildstorm, and I started to follow them. Even guys like Joe Benitez, and from the early days, Nick Manabat, and all those guys. I thought, wow, this is a place where you have these younger guys who are really kicking ass, and so I was kind of trying to level up. And there was a guy, Michael Lopez, who's working there at the time. Who's I saw his samples. No, they weren't even his samples. It was the stuff he was doing for Penthouse. And that
Right,
same
right.
year that I met you, or maybe it was San Diego Con. I was a long time ago, but anyway, um, there were these pages at the Wildstorm booth in either San Diego Con or WonderCon. He had just dropped them off, but I didn't know that. They were just sitting there on the table. I think he was talking to Merv because I met Merv at that convention.
Sure.
And I was looking at these samples and I was just blown away. I mean, they were just like, the pencils were so, just beautiful to look at. And so I remember that being kind of the thing where I was like, no, I mean, this is the place I have to work at. If guys are like of this level, younger guys at this level are working here, that's the place. That's the place I want to be. So yeah, I just pursued you guys. I mean,
Right.
that was what I wanted to do, and so yeah, when I got there, it was mind blowing. I mean, intimidating too, very very intimidating. It was.
I remember that I think it took you like a year to call me Scott because you were an incredibly respectful person. I mean, which kind of leads me to a question. I want to talk more about Wildstorm in a second, but it kind of leads me to a question. I always felt, and just this was my feeling, that you were raised right. That you had a lot of respect for people, that you treated people as you would want to be treated yourself. How was your family about you making this jump down to Wildstorm, to this crazy life of comics?
Um, okay, so yeah, my parents definitely, I think, raised me in it was somewhat restrictive but very kind of respectful environment, and I feel like I had kind of like a 1950s upbringing more than a 1980s upbringing in that way. Certain
I can
things
see that. Yeah.
certain things were kind of expected of me in the household. My mom was always super super supportive of whatever I did. My father was less so. I think he was more concerned with the practicality of what I wanted to do, and I also think that because both my parents work in the medical profession, and I think that because art was just so removed from anything he could understand. I mean, to this day, I don't think he really can grasp, uh, art of almost any kind. But I think at that point specifically, the main concern was, first of all, why do you want to do comic books? That's bizarre. That's there's other choices to be made. But I also think that it was. They came from the generation where you got to go to college, you got to get a degree, and based on that degree, you go into the working world. And the fact that I chose to go to Wildstorm when I was 19 and I'd only done a year of university, obviously the concern was there that I was blowing everything, that I was completely um, foregoing my possibilities of having a real, professional life at some point or another. And I remember it took years and years for him to actually kind of get the fact that, oh, this is a real job. You can actually make a living doing this.
I
So,
mean, they must be proud of you though, at to what for what you've achieved though. I mean, it's not like you're. I mean, to me, it's not like you're just a grunt, and I no disrespect for grunts, but you know what I mean. I mean, you've reached a certain status.
I don't think that that's on their radar, and that's fine. It's like I think that the main yeah, it's just not really something we talk much about. You know what I mean? Even with my brothers and
Yeah,
stuff, we don't spend a whole lot of time talking about that. But that's fine. That, like, I like the fact that I can have two different separate, like, I
sure.
like keeping the work part of it separate than I guess whatever my personal life is, if I can. You know what I mean? Like, in that
Yeah.
way, it's been hard, but yeah, yeah.
Well, let's move on a little bit. Um, so, when you first started at WildStorm, you were working for Ted Adams, who sort of ran the consumer products portion of IDW, and then later on would found IDW Publishing.
Yes.
Um, well, you did a lot of trading cards. You did comics that were licensed comics. I think you did a video game comic. What was that called?
Resident Evil. Yeah.
That was it. That was it. So, and you did that for maybe a year or so, right?
Yeah, yeah. And do you remember I was still doing samples? Do you remember that? I was still doing kind of like trying out pages, even working in the studio, because at
Sure.
that point in time, consumer products was a different division. And so it
Hmm.
wasn't like doing comics was a given. I mean, I remember Nicole, when I interviewed for the job at WildStorm, Nicole Hunting, who is the human resources officer there, she was like, "Look, you're going to have a 6 month trial period, and then there's going to be a review, and if you
Right.
don't like make the cut, like you're out of here." And so I remember
Good old
kind of
Nicole.
yeah, I remember kind of thinking, "Wow, this isn't like I thought it would be." I thought I would get down there and do comics right away, and it was a totally different experience. And so I thought, well, if I'm gonna do comics, I'm gonna have to keep trying to push this stuff through editorial because they might let me go. They might,
I,
and so I
that was
kept.
that was never even a consideration. Trust me on this. I mean,
I mean, now maybe you tell me that, but at the time it was, I was 19 and I moved all my shit to San Diego and was like, this is it. You know what I mean? Like, and now that I think about it, it's like that's probably not the smartest move, just in case that something happened. But yeah, I mean, I didn't really, that was just
no,
I was all
yeah,
in.
but you were young, you were enthusiastic, and Lee, I know it's not because of the passage of time, but there was really, I never for a minute thought, maybe the guy won't work out, because partially, one part was your talent, but your drive. And also, one thing that really impressed me about you early on was the people that you liked and the people you tried to learn about. Like, you had some, you talked about some of the young guys, but there were other influences, people I specifically remember. You were a huge fan of Kent Williams, a huge fan of Phil Hale, and you
Still,
always,
yeah.
of course, but you always strive to become a better artist, to learn to develop your craft. And, you know, there were there were some rough points. I remember giving you some reviews on your storytelling on a couple of things, but you were always trying to improve, and I appreciated that. And, even like some of your outside, I mean, Phil Hale may be sort of a fringe comic guy, but he's still sort of a comic guy. But, one of your big influences who I look at is Chuck Close,
Oh yeah.
and,
Right.
you look at, I actually can see to this day how you've incorporated his work, his style stylistically into your own. And, that's very rare. It's unusual to see, a fine artist be a big influence on a mainstream comic book artist. And that
Uh,
impresses me.
I mean, maybe only you. The whole cubic period that I went through. I mean that was just, I think, pretty bizarre. Even when I look back on it now, I think I mean that was an odd choice, and at a time when, you know still drawing like Jim Lee was the kind of the apex of what a lot of guys
Sure.
wanted to do. But I honestly also think a lot of that had to do with the fact that I like when I got introduced to those guys stuff like Phil Hale specifically, and I think that was through your office. I really do. I think that you had some issues of Spectrum, and I was looking through those issues of Spectrum in your office because you had books on Sergio Topi and all these other guys that were mind blowing to me, and you couldn't get these books anywhere. So your office was kind of like the place where all the best kind of artistic little treasures were hidden. And so I remember you had Spectrum, and flipping through Spectrum was kind of also, eye opening for me because it was my introduction to Phil Hale and a lot of other guys who, were working in that kind of fantasy art, um, part of the business. And yeah,
It's
at a certain point, I thought maybe this is what I should be doing, and not comic books. I mean, I think there's always been a part of me that feels like I'm like a round peg trying to fit into a square hole. Like I think that's been something that since the very beginning I've felt, because I don't really feel like my interests match with comic book interests. Like,
right.
you know, I love Alex Toth. I love that kind of simplified storytelling. When I see it done well, it's mind blowing, But that's not me. I mean, I don't. My own artistic journey isn't about those same kind of problem solving um, exercises, And so like I remember when I met Phil Hale, I asked him like, well, I wanted to ask him all these technical questions, and he said, and he was like, you could tell he didn't want to talk about it. He just said, look, I have a toolbox, and that's my toolbox, and I use those tools and to the best of my ability. And it took me years to kind of understand that. And maybe this is what he
Right.
meant, not. But what I think he meant by that, what I'd like to think he meant was, I have this group of interests and fetishes and like parts of my own genetics that get put into play, and that's what I can do with my artwork, and I can pursue what my interests are. And in my case, those things are often not in alignment with what most comic book stuff is after. You know what I mean? So, but that's the only thing I know. So I mean, for me to pursue anything else is kind of I've tried it, and it's unfulfilling. I can only
Well,
do that.
one thing I can tell you is so many of the artists that were at WildStorm, and I know these guys from firsthand experience, and honestly, I think of you, and stylistically, you guys are all completely different, but I think of you and Travis Charest and J. Scott Campbell, because all of you guys, in your way, you were all influenced to a great degree by Jim Lee and Art Adams, you know, and all three of you have completely, in my mind, come into your own. You can't be. I mean, I see influences. I see influences in everybody,
Sure,
but
sure.
when I look at your work, you're Lee Bermejo. Travis is Travis Charest. Jeff is J. Scott Campbell. It's all of you guys um, have really blossomed. I mean, I look back very fondly on the days of WildStorm, and I'm very proud of those days. It was, I'm a corny person, as you know, so I like to say, like Camelot, it was one brief, shiny moment, which is silly and whatever, but that's how I feel.
No, I look at it like my college years. I look back on that like that was my kind of, and so there's like a lot of affection for that period too, because it was, you're right, it was a totally unique place. There's never been anything like it before or after. And I feel very fortunate to have been a small part of that, like the legacy of whatever that was, and the guys that kind of went through there. I look at what Aaron Weisenfeld is doing now, and I think,
right, exactly.
This guy came out of WildStorm. I mean, he was part of that legacy, and now look at what he's doing. And so, I mean, I I have the fortune and misfortune of having had that experience when I was 19 to 24. So like, I was such a kid that, I mean, when I got there, we couldn't even go to bars. So it was like we were, we grew up. Some of us grew up there, we went through those uncomfortable growing pains there,
Well, to be fair about not drinking, you may not have been able to drink, but the intern apartment was called the crack house,
Right?
which is a joke. Which is a joke. There wasn't like crack around there,
but
at least I hope not.
But you know what I mean. I mean, I was so young that it was amazing because, like I said, just like college, I think that experience changed my trajectory in so many different ways. And obviously, it's like it was a very formative time in my life, and it's, when I look back on it now, I'm glad that I can kind of see all of those kind of shiny, fun things about it, and not kind of some of the more difficult aspects of it. You know what I mean? Which is just part of growing up. Like.
Well, all right. Let's let's talk a little bit about your first major gig. What, I can't remember. Was it Superman Gen 13?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right. That's right. And that was written by Adam Hughes, who was going to be drawing it as well, but then wasn't able to. And I can't remember exactly why. But so, what was that like? I mean, all of a sudden you're doing a 3-issue series, you're thrown in to the deep end. How was that for you? Your editor must have been a real pain in the ass, right?
No, it was, I mean, I was actually shocked at how much freedom you gave me, because you remember, like, the script wasn't written in comic book form. It was written prose form.
It was basically Marvel style.
Yeah. And it was written really well. Adam is I think he's a great writer. And
I agree.
You should write more. I mean, he's really good.
I agree.
And I can appreciate him even more now, having written some of my own stuff, because I could really tell now, looking back at some of that he was really writing for himself. He was writing to play up to his strengths. There was some emotional moments in there that I think, had he done them, would have been amazing. And so it was a little hard because of that shadow, because I knew I wasn't going to be anywhere near Adam Hughes. But it was amazing as a storytelling experience to take prose and have to turn that into, a structured kind of comic book. And so, the learning experience was amazing, on that, because it was great characters, and like I said, the story was great, and it was, when I look back on it now, it makes me cringe just because of its old stuff. But, like you can definitely see that the story, I'm happy that the story of that still kind of comes through, you know what I mean? Like that, what I think Adam intention of it was, and there's kind of a sweetness to it, you know what I mean, which isn't in a lot of anything else I've ever done. It's a sweet story.
Like I think back to that one page that I see it in my head. It might be differently. It might be different in reality. But there was one page where Supergirl, who's lost her memory, tries on all these different Supergirl costumes,
Yeah,
and that
yeah,
was a very sweet moment. That was really a very nice human scene
yeah,
that
yeah,
I really enjoyed. But so your next big book after that was that Batman Deathblow,
yeah. That was Batman Deathblow.
and
Uh,
now with that book, a couple of major things. One is, looking at that from my memory, it looks more. You're starting to become Lee Bermejo when you do that. On Gen 13 Superman, you were still finding yourself, but to me on Batman Deathblow, you were starting to look like what you would become, especially on the covers. And then the other important thing about this is that was the first collaboration with Brian Azzarello, who, of course, you've done a ton of stuff with. Can you talk about that a little bit?
yeah, that was all Tim Bradstreet, because I'd met Tim when I was a kid. I mean, I'd met Tim at a San Diego Comic Con. I loved Tim's work. Um, and I'd kind of kept in touch with him a little bit over the years, but he knew Brian. And so he was kind of the conduit, I think, to Brian. And at that time, 100 Bullets had just come out, like 6 issues or something had come out. And so Brian was just kind of brand new. He'd done a couple short stories. And Jim immediately kind of helped hook that up. And I think because, like, Brian is like the opposite of obstreperous, right? He's like very contained and he doesn't say much. And like the first meeting with him was like hard to get anything out of him in terms of what he wanted to do, or what if we would even kind of work well together. So what I remember most about that experience was everybody had left the studio. Carlos had gone, I think, back to Texas at that point. It was me, Trevor Scott, Sandra Hope, and Richard Friend, and we were the only guys. We were the only artists still working in the studio. Even Jeff, I don't think Jeff was there anymore. Yeah, I think he'd left too at that point. So WildStorm was really like the stripped down place, and I still to this day feel like I benefited from that simply because I was the only one really there doing doing anything. And so that's why we got Grant Goliash to do the colors, and painted colors, like he painted them by hand, which wasn't being done really much anymore at that time. And that really made the book for me, because I feel like it took it someplace else that it wouldn't have gone had it been colored any other way. But like what I really remember most about that book was being kind of alone at that point in time, and comics even felt like they were on such a downslide. It was like the industry felt like it was collapsing on itself. And Batman Death, like that was one of the first WildStorm DC projects together. Even though we'd done Superman Gen 13, um, had DC bought WildStorm at that point in time? I don't remember. Maybe they had.
I think so. It was not that I'm keeping track. It was October 5th, 1998, but that was the official day.
I,
Um,
oh, wow, yeah, yeah. We all thought we were going to get fired. I don't remember the day, but I remember what it was. But yeah, that's what I remember most about that project was kind of being the feeling of like being 100% on my own, and I had these great collaborators, so that was obviously something that helped prop me up. But yeah, that was the kind of the first big thing I did where I felt like I had some artistic ownership of it.
and as I recall, my memory, isn't always the best, but Mick Gray was the inker on that, right?
Tim was the inker for most of it,
Oh,
and then
Tim was really?
Tim inked most of it, yeah. And then Mick came in, maybe did a few pages. Richard Friend actually did a few pages too that Tim couldn't finish. Mick came in on John Luther. That was when Mick really came in.
Okay. Yeah. So I want to talk more about your work with Brian, but before that, um, I mean, the Batman Deathblow stuff probably led to those great Batman covers that you did on Legends of the Dark Knight, right?
That's I think exactly what happened there. Yeah, and that was right before I moved here. And I was doing those covers. I'd left WildStorm when I was doing those covers because I left in October of 2003, and I worked at home for like 2 months before moving here. So yeah, that was I was doing those. I think those were the covers I started, and I may have finished the last couple in Italy. The first couple months I was here.
You actually, I have a very clear recollection of this. You actually did finish them in the U.S.
Yeah, I
But
remember it because you bought a couple of them,
yeah,
and
yeah,
with
yeah.
that money of that I had from the originals, I bought a laptop. That was the first laptop I ever owned, and yeah, because I knew I needed a laptop. Yeah, God, yeah,
Right. So let's get back to Brian. So you've done a lot of stuff with Brian. I mean, you did the Luther book, you did the Joker book, you did the Watchmen book. I mean, so you obviously like the guy's writing. You obviously enjoy collaborating with him.
yeah.
I'm curious what that's like because, as you said, you can like walk up to Brian and say, "Brian, how you doing? Tell what's going on. How's everything?" And you go, "Sup."
Um, I
You know what
think
I mean?
yeah, no, it's totally true. I think that the thing about working with Brian that worked out for both of us was the fact that I kind of liked being left on my own. I didn't want to have I didn't want a relationship with a writer where I felt like there wasn't kind of the possibility of playing with the script because of that Gen
Right.
13 Superman experience. I honestly think that changed me because um, having that much freedom to kind of okay, there's 5 panels on this page. Okay, this page is going to be 3 panels, and I'm gonna organize like that style of writer is not easy to find in comics. At least at the time, it wasn't. Everybody was writing full scripts, and so Brian wrote full script too, but his scripts are so open. It's like panel one, establishing shot, panel two shot, and then there's the dialogue. He doesn't really even write any description. So I love that. I love the fact that I could just go in there and kind of do a lot of that myself. And the thing about Brian was the dialogue is king. Like his books are
Right.
structured because of like the way he plays with language. And so it was kind of perfect for me because I never felt real constricted working with him. I never felt like I
Yeah.
was. Um, I remember Carlos showed me an Alan Moore script, and it was. I always say there's like Brian at one end and there's Alan Moore at another end, and Alan's obviously a genius, and I love his work. But like those, for every page of comic book, there's 2 pages of script, and they're amazing to read because it's like he gives you every bit of detail and more, you know. But I liked the opposite, where I could kind of absorb the script and its simplicity, and then take off with it in my head and figure it out. So I think that's kind of what it boils down to, Brian. Yeah.
So I do want to talk about another project in particular because it's one that I think was a real kind of breakthrough for you, and it's one that I really love, and that's Batman Noel.
Oh yeah. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that was not only did you do the art on that, but you also wrote it. Was that the first book that you wrote?
Yeah, I wrote a short story at WildStorm for a WildStorm. It was a anthology that never wound up. Either it happened for a couple issues and then was canceled. I don't remember. But I wrote a Death Blow short story, which was the first thing I ever wrote. But that never wound up happening. And so then I kind of, after Joker, I wanted to do this something that I wrote myself. But because I was so timid, and at the time I came from WildStorm, and like we had a reputation. Nobody wanted to let us write. It was like that, the attitude in almost everywhere was that if you were a WildStorm guy, you couldn't tell a story. You didn't care about the writing. You wanted to do a splash page or big panel on every, like that was kind of the attitude. And so I thought, okay, if I'm going to be able to write something, I have to kind of be smart about what I choose to write and how I do it. And so when I proposed doing a Batman version of A Christmas Carol, it was kind of like my way of saying, look, like you guys, like the story's there. I'm just going to adapt it to Batman, so you guys don't have to worry about me as much. And I actually wrote the entire script and gave that to Chirello, and said, okay, because it was, I felt like if I didn't do that, they would never, ever let me write. They would never give me the reins to write anything. So I had to do a lot of kind of work beforehand to kind of secure that job. Yeah.
But Chiarello is also, he's an advocate for artists also.
Yes.
And I just want to make one comment. I'd like you to talk more about the experience on Batman Noel. But when you talk about, Marvel and DC, maybe, kind of looking down their noses at the Wildstorm artists, that might be true, but that didn't stop all of them from trying to poach all of my goddamn artists at Wildstorm. I mean, every single one. But anyway, go ahead. But I am interested in hearing more about Batman Noel because again, stylistically also, it's it's an extension from what you did previously, but it is different. So could you talk about, your style, what you were going for on that particular book?
Yeah, things softened. Like things softened a little bit on that book. Like the Joker was still kind of hard and angular, and even the pencil rendering stuff was. I was still doing the Chuck Close kind of tiling approach to kind of the pencil rendering, where I was almost doing them like brush strokes, like singular brush strokes. And then on Noel, I wanted to have. I remember saying at the time, "Oh, this will be like my version of a children's book," which everybody kind of laughed at. But that was my intention. My intention was to do a softer kind of thing, and so that came through in the artwork, where I started to kind of really do more painting. Painting in the sense that I was ink washing a lot more than pencil. I wasn't using. Previously, I'd always pencil rendered everything, and then used ink wash to kind of darken values here and there. And Batman Noel was where I started to kind of really just paint. Just go straight to the ink wash, and there was pencil there too, but I did less of it than I was doing before because I felt more. Um, I think I just started to kind of feel like I was knowing my forms a little bit better, and I could understand. I wasn't as worried about the nuts and bolts at that point in time. I knew the drawing would be solid enough um, that I could kind of trust myself. Whereas I think the previous projects I was still really overly concerned with the drawing actually working. First and foremost. So that's like when I think of Batman Noel, that's what I think about. I think about a moment in time where, yeah, and I thought that's where I would go after that. I thought I would just keep doing stuff, in that style, which sort of happened, but sort of didn't. That things also shifted again after that.
Okay. It's one of my personal favorites of all the things you've done. Now, you also
First edition.
wrote. Do you have all the art? Do you have all the art for it?
So one guy has all the art, and he has the black and white Batman short story that I also did almost right after that, right? Close to that. But one guy has all of it. He bought all of it. So yeah, yes.
Let's talk at Como. um, so speaking of you writing, I know a passion project for a long time was Suiciders. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I had the idea. I started thinking about Suiciders when I moved to Italy because, like, when I moved here, I was moving not because I felt like I needed a better life somewhere else, but because I met a girl, I fell in love, and it was this whole experience of my life changing and moving to another place, learning another language, adapting to a different culture, and that experience it changes you, and you don't even know it at first. It just kind of happens, and
Sure.
then you start to notice little things that seep in, and not all of them are good. Like some of them psychologically make you start to wonder, well, I don't feel comfortable in this culture anymore, but I'm not comfortable in this new culture. Um, what's where do I stand? You know what I mean? Where do I feel like where do I feel like really is home? And so I want to do this story about that more than anything else, about someone who is pursuing a dream and moves someplace else for that dream, but that, like, the story structure of that took wild turns through the years. And I mean, I've always said that. I mean, I love writing, but I'm not the kind of writer where if someone comes to me, as they have before, and said, pitch us Green Arrow. What's a Green Arrow story? Um, I can come up with something, but I'm not that kind of writer. I have to kind of live with it for a long time, and it changes. Things kind of morph, and then like at a certain point, something in my life will be proffered, and I'll use that, and everything will kind of coalesce, and I can come up with whatever it's going to be. And that was Suiciders. I did Batman Noel, and after Batman Noel, wait, did I do Rorschach first, or I forget. Anyway, I know that when I did Suiciders, it felt like I got to do this now. Like, this is the thing I have to do. And
Sure.
it was because all the elements of that story and my life kind of coalesced at that point in time,
Right.
that I had to do it. There was no really doing anything else.
You had an emotional connection. It was an integral part of who you were.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's still the thing I'm most proud of, in terms of, like, no one read it, no one bought it, but I'm really, well, I mean, like, it was
I know.
the nicest thing that anyone ever said about the book was Mark Andraco, who I don't really know that well. I think we've met a couple times. He came up to me at San Diego Con one year and just talked to me about Suiciders, and it was clear he read it. And I was like, wow, so a few people read that book. But, like, it was just something I had to do. That was that.
Right. So you've kind of answered this already, but what else excites you about what you do? Well, you kind of already answered that. But maybe I'll segue into a different question, and that would be, what kinds of stories? You've done so much. What kinds of stories would you like to do in the future? What are you working on? What are you working on right now?
Well, right now I'm doing. I'm finishing actually. I'm on the last 15 pages of this project that I've been doing for. It's taking me almost 3.5 years now. It's a book called A Vicious Circle that I'm doing with a writer called Matson Tomlin, and it's a sci-fi kind of time travel story about two assassins who, anytime they kill somebody, they have this malady. Anytime they kill somebody, they travel through time, and so it's kind of this meditation on violence and stuff like that. So I'm finishing that for Boom, and then it's I mean I'm hoping to do something small that I write myself again, because I'd really like to. There's a couple things that I'd like to do, but I really like the. There's some themes in the work that I noticed now that I didn't really realize at the time. But there's this kind of there's a few themes I'd like to play around with a little bit more in the future, storytelling wise, and we'll see what floats to the surface.
So you started in this business very, very young. Do you have any advice for young artists who want to break into comics, who want to become either comic artists or illustrators? You know, I mean, obviously it's a very different time now,
Yeah.
especially, with social media, being able to instantly get your work out there in front of people. But, do you have any advice for young creators out there?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I wish I'd known when I started out was that in comic books is a very unique, very kind of special medium that almost nothing else, but maybe music artistically can give you, and that's that you can be one singular voice and kind of do it all. You can tell the kind of story you want to tell with uh, sometimes with very little outside interference, and I can't think of much else. Movies, certainly you can't do that, and I mean, painting is similar, but it's not a storytelling kind of experience in the same way that kind of comic books are, and what I would say to like most people doing it now is try to do it all, in the sense that, like, when I was breaking in, people said, no, decide. Do you want to be a penciler? Do you want to be an inker? Do you want to be a writer? Do you want to be a colorist? Focus on that and pursue that. And at the time, that was totally the way to do it, because, you couldn't, or there were guys like Paul Pope who got in kind of doing it all, but those guys were, not everybody was a Dave Lapham or a Paul Pope or any of those guys. Now I feel like, because of all these things, that I really urge people who want to learn about comics to do it all, just because the experience of lettering your own stuff, the experience of coloring your own stuff, inking, writing, it teaches you so much about the storytelling process. Like, just figuring out where a sound effect goes in a panel can change everything about the way that story reads. Um, when I started out, I didn't care about where the word balloons were going to go, and and I remember. Do you remember when Frank Miller and Lynn Varley came to the studio because Lynn was learning how to use the computer to color Dark Knight 2?
And
I
Ben
showed,
was teaching her, yeah.
right, yeah, and I showed Frank, and I remember Frank saying, "Do you think about where your lettering goes? Because I don't." It was clear I didn't, and it was like, oh my god, I'm only thinking about this I'm only thinking about this one little thing. I'm a cog in a big machine, and I'm blind to what the other cogs in the machine and pieces of the machine have to be doing. I have to be aware of all those things and how they turn and where and what that mechanism is going to then put into function. So by actually doing all those things, you learn about, okay, if you color yourself, you learn about what emotion you can bring to a scene through color. You learn about how that changes the storytelling, because it all has to feed that thing. That's, you've been telling me this since I was 19, that it's about the storytelling. It's, you can draw great pictures and that's fantastic, but it's about the storytelling is the thing that's the most important. And by learning about all these other functions, it teaches you that, I think, better than just kind of focusing on that one individual task at hand, and maybe you suck at a bunch of them at the beginning, I tell people it's better to suck at a lot of those things and get better than just be able to do one thing and suck. And that means write it, draw it, color it if you can, letter it if you can, try to figure out how what the important functions of all these elements of comic book storytelling are.
Well,
yeah.
I just want to say one thing, and you don't need to say anything, but, and this, I hope this doesn't sound like really condescending or pompous, but I'm very proud of the artist that you have become. And I mean that very sincerely. Anyway.
It means a lot.
It's absolutely true, man. Absolutely true. And not only a great artist, but, the person who you are, you were always a good person, but you've turned into a really good man. And anyway, all right. Let's not start tearing up now. So Lake Como. So you've been there before, and obviously you've lived in Italy for 20 years. So is this old hat for you, or are you looking forward to the show? What are you looking forward to at Lake Como?
There's nothing old hat about Lake Como. Can I tell a story? Do I have time to tell a story?
Of course. Go ahead.
So last year, I was lucky enough to be at the show last year as well, and it was my second time at the show. And you'll see this year, it's beautiful. They do this kind of opening night. It's drinks and dinner and stuff, and it's an amazing chance to meet people and chit chat, and because of like the nature of comics and the nature of it being a small industry, you get to know people over the years, and it's number one. It's Como's great because it's artist centric. So you're seeing people like Milo Manara or Tonino Liberatore. For me is a big, huge artistic inspiration. Yeah. And so that opening night last year, I had a great humbling moment, and it reminded me of being a kid going to San Diego Con, seeing Kent Williams or seeing Will Portesio or these guys who I loved, and it reminded me of that because you remember at that point in time, conventions were smaller. They weren't as big as kind of what they've become in the years. And I'm a gigantic Jeff Darrow fan. I love Jeff's work. And the last day of Como last year, I finally got up from my table and decided to walk around and kind of see all these great artists. And I stopped Jeff's table and chatted with Jeff for 40 minutes or whatever. Looked at his originals, and which for me was definitely the highlight of the show for me. And at the end of the show, he hands me this drawing, and he's like, "Yeah, this is for you." And it was an amazing Jeff Darrow drawing that he just gave me. And I don't, he probably doesn't understand what that meant for me. Like for me, it was a big moment of, you know, a guy whose work I loved, and a moment of complete generosity, like out of nowhere. You know, I never would have expected anything like that. And so that to me kind of encapsulated my Como experience, which is being in the presence of great artists in an environment that also just feels much more intimate and feels kind of more like what I remember comic book conventions being in the 90s, if that makes any sense.
Sure.
It feels like I just did an ad for Como. It feels like, hey guys, like here's your Lake Como. Here's your advertisement for Lake Como. But it's you know, it's a great.
Well, you know, to me, I mean, I haven't been to the show, but I've spoken to so many people besides you who've told me so much about it that, you know, I've used this term before and people are going to get sick of it, but it sounds to me like it's the gold standard for this kind of event. You know, I mean, the idea of having a chair put in front of the artist so you can have that face-to-face experience. You know, you're not looking down at an artist, you're sitting across from them, talking, looking at their work. You know, to me, it sounds like an incredibly special thing. And European shows are great anyway. I mean, I love Luca, Angoulême, but you know, this one sounds very different, you know, and I'm really looking forward to it.
You walk around and last year, whoa, there's Dave McKean. Whoa, there's, you know, it's just and no one is really that was the crazy thing, is you're used to these massive crowds of places like San Diego Con, and that's just not Como. It's
more intimate.
I'm sure they would love to have those kind of crowds, but for me, you know, it's nice because there's a chance to actually talk with these people, or at least, you know, see the work.
You know, Lee, they actually limit the attendance at Como.
Do they? Okay,
yeah. So I don't think they've ever capped out completely, but and I'm not sure what the number is. I think it might be 1,000, might be 800, but whatever it is, you know, it is capped out. So that says something a lot about the guys who run the show and the kind of experience it is. But anyway, we are like way over. They're going to have to edit this thing down, I think. But Lee, it's always a pleasure. And both Amanda and I really look forward to seeing you in a couple of months at Lake Como.
Yeah, let's try to get some food if we can. You know, I know it's a couple days, not a lot of time, but let's try to do that.
Absolutely. I would love that. But cool. Anyway, thank you very much, Lee, for joining us.
Thank you for everything. Thank you for giving me a career. It's like, you're thinking
because
podcast, you gave me a career.
Because of course you'd be like, you know, still working at Haagen-Dazs if I didn't, like, you know, find you. Yeah, right. Yeah. You know, the nice thing about comics is, you know, if I didn't find you, somebody else would have a couple of months later. There's no question about it. But anyway, thank you for saying those things. All right. Okay. That's it. And another episode of Comic Book Prose comes to a close. We really appreciate Lee taking the time to chat with us today. You can find more of his work at Lee Bermejo Art, or join us at the Lake Como Comic Art Festival to meet him in person. I'm Scott Goonbier, and as always, it's been an absolute pleasure guiding you through the colorful world of comic art. Comic Book Prose is produced by Rami Atasi and Remzi Atasi. Our executive producer is Sal Avenanti. The show is edited and mixed by Mason Vendetti. Don't forget to subscribe and watch every extended interview on YouTube at Comic Book Prose, or subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform. Follow us on Instagram and X at Comic Book Prose for updates on future episodes. Until next time, keep dreaming, creating, and exploring the fascinating world of comic art. Goodbye for now.